If you have your Bible or your phone, open up to Matthew 28. Really excited that you're here today. If you're watching online, I want to thank you for watching. We're kicking off a new series today that we've been looking forward to for several weeks, and hopefully you're ready for your groups tonight. If you made contact with your group leader, if you still would like to be in a group for tonight, David will be out at Connection Point, which is moved down the hall just a little bit. He'll be there to help you get hooked up. But we're going to be talking about the same things tonight that we're going to be talking about this morning. And as we start, I want to ask you a question, and here it is. What comes to your mind when you hear the word hero? Now, for some of you, maybe it's the image of some real-life hero, some historical figure that you've read about, or maybe you've seen a documentary about, or maybe the first thing that comes to your mind are like the everyday heroes, that we so often take for granted, policemen and firemen and EMS workers and soldiers and teachers, people who are working to improve the lives of the people around them. Or it could be that if you're like me, the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear the word hero are the superheroes who made up your childhood. Now, you see a picture of a few of them here. I don't know how it is for you, but like when I was a kid, there was something about these superheroes and their stories that drew me in. And you'll notice if you're a person that goes to a lot of movies, every year there are half a dozen movies released that tell the stories of some of these superheroes, and they always do well because even as you get older, there's something about these stories that just sort of draws you back in. I looked it up this week. There's a website that actually ranks the top 10 superheroes of all time. I won't share the whole list with you, but I thought I'd give you the top 5. Coming in at number 5, this all-time list of superheroes, is the guy you see up in the corner there, Captain America. He made his debut in 1941, where he was depicted on the cover of a comic book punching Adolf Hitler in the face, which is kind of a cool way to debut, if you're into that. Remember, this was right during the beginning of World War II, so right off the bat, Captain America has always been really popular. Coming in at number 4 is the guy you see just below Captain America, Spider-Man. Now, I don't know how many movies have been made about Spider-Man, but it seems like there's one on TV at least every other night. If you're flipping channels, they're always on. So Spider-Man's always been really popular. Number 3 is one that may surprise you. Up in the other corner, that is Wolverine. He's one of the X-Men. He's got these things that, shoot out of his hands. And he's also sometimes portrayed as being one of the Avengers. So if you're into that, you'll know what that is. And then the guy there in the bottom corner is one you'll always know. And the top 2 on this list are people that everybody knows, the top 2 that are so recognizable, and that's Superman. Faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a locomotive. He's able to leap tall buildings in a single bound. X-ray vision, he can fly, the bullets, bounce off of him. He's always got perfect hair. He is the model superhero. And he made his debut in 1938, and since then he's been really popular, but he's not the most popular. According to this website, the most popular superhero of all time is this next guy, Batman. Batman made his debut 1 year after Superman in 1939, and since then he's been, the main character in all sorts of comic books and movies and TV series. And what's interesting about Batman, and somebody actually tried to debate this with me after the first service, is he doesn't really have any particular superhero skills or special powers. He's just a normal guy in his day-to-day life named Bruce Wayne. But then at certain dramatic moments in the story, he becomes the caped crusader who goes around protecting the citizens of Gotham City. So if you've read any of the Batman stories, or if you've seen any of the movies, you know that Batman is often assisted or served by his faithful butler, Alfred. Now here's a picture I've got of them. This was taken from the last Batman movie. There's Bruce Wayne and his butler, Alfred. Now on the surface of it seems like Alfred is just a normal guy. He works for Bruce Wayne. He's just one of a long list of employees. But the more you dig into the story, you discover that there's more to Alfred than meets the eye. One little known fact about Alfred is if you go back and you read the original Batman stories in the comic books, is that Alfred himself was once a highly decorated elite soldier in the British Special Forces. So while he may look like just a butler, he's actually a highly trained soldier. One writer who's worked on several of the Batman movies said this in a recent interview. He said, from a storytelling standpoint, we've always viewed Alfred as if he was Batman's Batman. He's the one who always brings order to the chaos of Bruce Wayne's life and enables him to become the hero. Now, if you're like me, if you ever watched a Batman movie, you just assume that Alfred was kind of just there. You know, he's a minor character. At best, he's kind of a sidekick. But for the people who really know the story, Alfred is more than a sidekick. In fact, you could say that without Alfred, there'd be no Batman. This morning, we're kicking off this series that we're calling HeroMaker. It's based off this book that our leaders have been reading, written by a guy named Dave Ferguson, who preaches outside of Chicago, and a guy named Warren Bird, who's a researcher. And we're going to really be digging into this book both on Sundays and in our groups on Sunday nights over the next few weeks. But as we jump into this, I want to take just a moment and explain what we're talking about when we use that phrase, HeroMaker. So if you're keeping track on your outline or in the FCC app on your phone, here's the definition that we want you to get. A HeroMaker is a person who shifts from being a hero to making others the hero in God's unfolding story. Now, we're going to talk about that a lot over the next few weeks, but for now, I want to make sure you understand that what we're talking about is this mental shift that takes place in your mind where you go from wanting to be the hero to helping others become the hero of this story that God's trying to write. But as soon as we say that, there's this challenge, and it's this. If you're honest with yourself, you know that deep down inside, there's two things everybody wants. Number one, everybody wants to make a difference. I mean, there's a lot of things you'd like to change. There's a lot of people that you'd like to impact. Everybody wants to make a difference. But number two, everybody wants to be the hero of the story. Most of us approach life as if it was a movie and we're the main character. And life is, it's all about us. It's all about what we've got going on. It's all about us achieving our hopes and our dreams. So when we talk about possibly stepping out of the spotlight and putting the spotlight on other people, there's something within us that just sort of naturally resists that. Most of us, if we were honest, would say that we would much rather be Batman than we would be Alfred. We want to be the star of the show. And yet it could be that in order to achieve the difference that we'd like to make, in order to have the long-lasting impact that all of us would like to have, it could be that God has to work through others instead of us. To look at it from a spiritual perspective, we could say it like this. God doesn't just want to work in you, He wants to work through you in order to impact the people around you. Now, most of the time we go through life and what's our main focus? We're worried about what God is doing in us and for us. But as you grow and as you mature a little bit, you realize it's not just about what God is doing in you, it's about what God wants to do through you to impact the people around you. So the question is, how does that happen? What does this process look like in real life? One writer said this. He said, when it comes to accomplishing great visions, it's never the dreams, but the small decisions you make that determine your progress. So starting today and over the next few weeks, we're going to talk about some of those small decisions that all of us can make that can help move us closer to achieving our dreams. So if you have your Bible or your phone, before we look at Matthew 28, there's one verse I want to look at from John 14. It's on your bulletin already. It's the memory verse for this week. And just to set this up for you, this is just before Jesus is going to be arrested and go to be crucified on the cross and go back to his Father in heaven. So he's in these final moments, he's trying to prepare his disciples for what life is going to be like without him on the earth with them. And he makes this statement. He says, very truly I tell you, whoever believes in me will do the works that I've been doing, and they will do even greater things than these, because I'm going to the Father. Now, if you're like me, you read that, and you've read the New Testament. I mean, you hear the stories of all the incredible things that Jesus did. We talked last week about how he helped this paralyzed man to walk. We talked about the blind people that he gave sight to, the deaf people that he gave their hearing to. He even raised dead people. He walked on water. He fed, the multitudes. But we know all the stories. And you read what he says here, and you think, okay, Jesus, I believe you. I mean, I believe in you. But when I look at the things that I'm doing compared to some of the things that you've done, I don't see anything that even remotely resembles what you did, much less anything that could be considered greater. I mean, we've never walked on water. We've never raised the dead. We've never give, sight to the blind or allowed deaf people to hear. So what on earth is Jesus talking about when he says that you and I in the future will do greater things than he did because he went to the Father? Well, if you want to understand what Jesus is talking about, you have to go back and read the whole passage in its context. And what you discover when you read John 14 is that the thing that Jesus is talking about is not healing sick people, it's not raising dead people. Instead, he's talking about connecting with lost people. That's why in the beginning of the chapter, he says, I'm going to prepare a place for you, and in my Father's house there are many rooms. He's preparing these rooms so that in the future, more and more people could come and spend eternity with him. One Bible scholar said it like this: the greatness of Jesus' followers would not be in the number or character of their miracles, but in the number and character of their converts. In other words, when Jesus talked about us doing greater things, he's talking about you and me and people like us who believe in him, expanding the influence of his kingdom and inviting more and more people to become a part of this movement. He's talking about us multiplying his influence. We're to take the gospel further than he could ever take it during his short life on earth and reach more people than he could ever reach because of his limited time. Which brings us to Matthew 28. One of the things that every great superhero has in common is that they all have a clear mission. Superman's mission is to defeat Lex Luthor and, save the planet. Spider-Man's mission is to stop the Green Goblin. Batman's mission is to, fight back the Joker and the Penguin and all the other weirdos and save Gotham City. If you ever seen the movies Mission Impossible, there's always this dramatic moment near the beginning of the movie when Ethan Hunt, who's played by Tom Cruise, is given his mission. Usually it's in the form of a video, and it says, your mission, should you choose to accept it, and then it says, disarm the bomb or, catch the bad guys. And then he accepts the mission, then it self-destructs, and the rest of the movie is about him trying to fulfill that mission. Well, when you get to Matthew 28, Jesus gives us, as his followers, a very clear mission. We call it the Great Commission, but it's really nothing more than our job description as Christians. This is the thing. This is the one thing that Jesus told all of us to spend our time doing over and above everything else that we do. I want you to look at this with me. Matthew 28, verse 16. Then the 11 disciples went to Galilee and the mountain where Jesus had told them to go. When they saw him, they worshiped him, but some doubted. Then Jesus came to them and said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. Now, I know what some of you are thinking when you read that, because there have been different points in my life when I've thought the same thing. You read that and you think, that's exactly what my church is supposed to be doing. You know that. I mean, that's what we're called to do, and you think, that's exactly what we're supposed to do, and I hope the leaders of my church are doing that. But here's what I'll make sure you understand. Whenever you read the New Testament and it talks about the church, it almost never refers to a physical location. It never refers to a specific building. Instead, when you're talking about the church, you're talking about this group of individual believers who have banded together in order to honor God and advance his kingdom. So that means that whenever you talk about the mission of the church, you're not talking about the mission of this location. You're talking about your mission as an individual follower of Jesus. See, the mission of reaching lost people and making disciples is not something that your church is supposed to do. It's something you're supposed to do. But let's be real. I mean, for most of us, that's where the disconnect comes in. Most of us would much rather talk about what the church is doing to expand the circle than we would talk about what we ourselves are doing. For most people, there's this attitude, this mindset that, hey, church is a place I go to church, but there has to be at some point this shift that takes place where you move from just going to church to actually being the church. So when Jesus says, hey, your job is to make disciples, he's talking about specifically your job and my job. This is a shift that all of us have to make in order for us to have the impact that we want to have. So as we go through this, there are 5 quick things that Jesus highlights or mentions. We'll dig into these more as we go through, but today's just sort of an introduction. So here's the first one. If you want to be a hero maker, you first have to become proficient in multiplication thinking. One of the things that Jesus challenged his disciples to do was to help move Christianity from just being this local movement centralized in and around Jerusalem to becoming a global movement that would touch every nation, tribe, and language group. In other words, their primary mission, right from the very beginning, was to multiply the movement. And the way for them to do that is summed up in just 2 words that Jesus uses, and those are the words, make disciples. The only imperative in the whole paragraph is make disciples. And as you explore this, Jesus even gives us a pattern for how to do this. But first, it's implied that if you're going to do this, you're first going to have to take some time and connect with lost people. Now, for some people, they think that's impossible. I've been a Christian my whole life, and all my friends are Christians, and everybody I hang out with is a Christian. So they think that they have to do something extraordinary to connect with lost people. When the reality is, most likely you're already connected. I was invited to a thing a couple weeks ago. We talked about ministry in a small town. This guy made the comment, he said, what happens in a small town is that over time, lost people become invisible. And here's what he meant by that. You see the same people over and over again. You go to church with, you work with them, you see them at the funeral homes, you see them at the ball games, you see them at the grocery stores, and pretty soon, if you're not careful, you know their names and you know them, and you forget that they're separated from God. It's like they become invisible. So my suspicion is there are already a lot of people that you're connected to that are separated from God that just need somebody to help them get connected. It's not like you have to go door to door and knock on a bunch of doors. For most people, all you have to do is go home or look around your office, or next time you go to the store, look and see who you're saying hi to. So the point is you make this connection, and at some point Jesus says you have to teach them some things about him. Maybe that's a series of private conversations. Maybe you invite them to your church and they start to learn some things, and hopefully they start to get it, and the message of Jesus captures their heart. Then eventually they put their trust in him. Then Jesus says the next step is you baptize them. When you read the New Testament, baptism was always this moment of identifying with Jesus. But the problem in our culture is, and for a lot of people, baptism is kind of where this whole thing stops. And maybe you've even heard that. Maybe you've even said that, well, I'm baptized, so now I'm good, as if that was the finish line. Truth is, baptism is just the starting line. It's not even close to the finish line. If you look at what Jesus says in verse 20, he says, once this person is baptized, your job then is you continue to teach them. And what are you teaching them? You're teaching them to do with other people what you've just done with them. So there's this phrase that I hope that you'll build into your vocabulary, and here it is: a disciple who makes disciples. That's your job. That's your goal. You want to be a disciple who makes other disciples. And you want the disciples that you make to help be people who make other disciples. That's our mission. It's to make disciples who make disciples. So let me give you an example of what this could look like. Let's just say that you made it your mission. You say, hey, all right, starting today, in the next 6 months, I'm going to connect with somebody. I'm going to help them connect with Jesus, and we're going to win them to Jesus. So you say one person in the next 6 months. Not 50 people, not 5 people, not 3 people, just one. And 6 months into it, you have some success, and you and the person that you just won to Christ, you train them to do the same thing. So now 6 months in, there's 2 of you doing it. And then both of you decide, we're going to do this over again. And now a year in, there's 4 of you. And 18 months in, there's 8 of you. And within 2 years, there's 16 people all doing this same thing. You see how this works? It's the power of multiplication. And here's the deal. If we had just 5 people in our church that would do this, out of the 300 and some that come, if we had just 5 people, within 2 years, you could see 80 new believers. You think that would have an impact on our community? It's the power of multiplication. So here's my question. Who is it that you're connecting with? Who's that one lost person that you're doing your best to try to bring closer to Jesus? What are you doing? Who are you targeting to multiply your influence? Here's a second thing. It's this whole idea of permission giving. One of the things Jesus makes clear in this passage is that all authority belongs to him. And yet, as he prepares to ascend back to his Father in heaven, at least at some level, he transfers that authority to his followers, and he gives us permission to go in his name and make disciples. In other words, he's giving us permission to multiply the movement in his name. Now compare that to what most of us do. Most of us, if we're honest, are much better at trying to hold on to authority than we are giving authority away. And why do we do that? We do it because we like to be the hero, man. We like to be the star of the show. But what if instead of trying to hold on to our authority and stay in the spotlight, we made it our mission as followers of Jesus to help other people become the heroes of the story? So if you're a leader in our church, I want to ask you a question. Any kind of leader, who is it that you're training to take your place? I mean, who's going to teach your class, and who's going to volunteer in the kids ministry and play in the worship band and run the tech stuff and be on the security team? I mean, who's going to do all of that when you can't do it anymore? Because here's the deal. That's your job to get them ready. Keep in mind as you read this story, if you were picking your team, you go back and you read some of the things that led up to this moment, you might not have picked the disciples. I mean, these are guys who were a lot like us. They got it wrong way more than they got it right. And yet Jesus chooses them, and he gives them permission to move forward. He even gives them permission to fail if that's what it takes. And if we want to have a long-term impact, be the same for us. Here's a third thing. It's the focus on disciple multiplying. Again, it's this idea of making disciples who make disciples. Now, for the most part, we live in a world that's obsessed with, self-help and self-improvement. You go to a bookstore, you click on Amazon and you see all the hundreds of titles. And for most people, the idea is, how can I get better at what I do so that my life will get better? You know what I mean? How can I get better so I'll make more money, so I don't have to do this anymore, so I can go do some other stuff that I really want to do? I mean, for most people, the main focus of life is, how do I accomplish more? For most of us, it's, how can I be Batman? How can I be the star? But what if instead of always having to be Batman, you instead took the approach that you were going to be Alfred for somebody else? 2 Timothy chapter 2, the Apostle Paul writes to his younger associate Timothy. Here's what he said. He said, "And the things you've heard from me, say in the presence of many witnesses, and entrust reliable people who will also be qualified to teach others." Now remember, Paul's this guy, he's invested heavily in Timothy. Paul has been a hero, Timothy's a hero, and now he's saying your job is to help some other people learn what you've already learned and continue pushing the movement forward. That's why as a church, that's the main reason that we've made and continue to make such a huge investment in reaching kids and teenagers. Because we know that the future of our community and the future of our church has very little to do with what we can accomplish, but it will have very much to do with what they can accomplish. So if you're here and you're a parent, you're a grandparent, an aunt, an uncle, a teacher, this is your job. This is the thing that you should be focused on. This should be your mission in life. How can I multiply the movement to train the next generation? Here's a third thing that you see in this fourth thing you see in this passage. It's gift activating. Now, back in 1989, there was a popular movie that came out, Driving Miss Daisy. Some of you probably remember that movie. It won the Academy Award 1990. And if you know the story, it focuses on this relationship between this wealthy widow and her driver, who was played by Morgan Freeman, over the course of like 25 years. And most of the movie focuses on conversations that took place in the car while he was driving Miss Daisy around. So I've got this bobblehead I want to show you. Some of you have seen this. If you've ever been in my office, I know it's kind of creepy, but hopefully you can see it. This is a bobblehead that was given out in 2009 at the North American Christian Convention is my microphone working? Did it go off? Okay. There it is. We're back. This was given out in I felt like I was screaming at you. This was given out in 2009 at the North American Christian Convention. Wayne Smith is a guy that I used to drive around quite a bit. He preached at Southland Christian Church in Lexington, Kentucky for 40 years. 40 years at the same church. When he started, they had just a handful of people. And then by the time he retired, they were running almost 4,000 on a normal weekend. So today they run 10,000, but that was back in a time when, there were no big churches. You know what I mean? It was kind of the first big church in our area for sure. So they made this bobblehead, and Wayne was really excited because he thanked the creators for slimming him down. You know what I mean? He saw this, and he said, I have not looked this good in years. I mean, this is awesome. But it made me think about when I first started in ministry, Wayne was still at Southland, and towards the end of his time at Southland, and even like after he retired, you cannot imagine how in demand as a speaker he was. I mean, almost every night he was at banquets and church services and business meetings. I mean, he was all over the place. And by his own admission, Wayne did not like to drive. So what he did is he had a bunch of dudes like me that he would call, and you'd pick up the phone. A lot of times he wouldn't even say hello. He would just tell you, hey, you're picking me up at this time at my house, and here's when we'll be back. He never told you where you were going, and he never asked you if you were already busy. You know what I mean? He just assumed that you would be there. For that reason, a lot of us lovingly referred to him as the Pope, and his house was the Vatican, because when the Pope comes, you just call. What's interesting, though, is today, if you go to any minister's group, and this happened a couple weeks ago to me, it doesn't matter where you are. If there's more than 20 people there, there's going to be 4 or 5 or 6 of them that all had those same experiences. I mean, for 40 years, Wayne would just pick up the phone, he'd call people, and he would say, you're driving me. And for those guys like me in those car rides, those rides became like a graduate school in life and leadership. And it was always the same. You'd pick him up at his house. Before you left Lexington, you'd stop and get a milkshake. You'd go wherever you were going, and while you were going, he would sit in the back seat, and he would try out his jokes for that night on you. And of course, he was wanting to see your response. And then you'd go wherever it was. Usually there was a meal involved. Then you drive him home, and on the way home, usually 2 things happen. He'd talk to you about anything you wanted to talk about. And usually you'd stop and get another milkshake. And then he'd threaten you not to tell his wife. And then he'd pay you. Yeah, you could pay for that. But it was those conversations. So a lot of times I'm sitting in my office, and I look up at this thing, and it kind of looks like him. And I'll ask myself, did he really need a driver to all those things? Or was he doing something else? And the more I've thought about it, my suspicion is that he was doing something entirely different. We thought he was trying out his jokes, but he really wasn't, because he told the same ones everywhere he went. But I think what he was doing instead was helping a whole bunch of people activate their gifts and develop their gifts. Same thing Jesus did with his disciples. One scholar went back to the New Testament, did a study of how Jesus spent his time, and you'd be surprised if you go back and look, Jesus spent 75% of his time just investing in his 12 disciples. Not the multitudes, not the masses of people, but 75% of his time just with those 12 people. You see an example of this in John 3 when John writes, after this, Jesus and his disciples went into the Judean countryside where he spent some time with them. He spent some time with them. Here's the deal. In order to influence people, you have to spend time with people. You can't do it from a distance. For some of you, the best thing you could do today would be go home and build some time into your schedule where you can intentionally invest in the people who are closest to you. Maybe you start a weekly lunch meeting. Maybe you mark off, 3 nights a week where you're not going to do anything but hang out with your kids. Maybe it's a weekly breakfast. I don't know what it is for you, but I do know this. It's hard to impact people from a distance. You have to get close to them. One more thing. The 5th thing you see in this. If you want to become a hero maker, you have to focus on kingdom building. If I gave you a blank piece of paper and I said, I want you to write down your goal, your number one goal for life, the number one thing that you hope to accomplish, what would it be? I mean, you may never thought about it. For some people, it's something as simple as, hey, I want to live in a big house and drive a fast car and, take vacations. For some people, it's something to do with your job. There's a certain job you want to have. There's a certain number you want your bank account to reflect. I don't know what it is for you, but I do know this. As he came to the end of his time on earth, Jesus made it abundantly clear that he was building a kingdom that was unlike any other kingdom the world had ever known. And against all odds, he invited some really messed up and self-centered people like you and me to participate in building that kingdom. Here's the deal. You're going to spend your life doing something. You're going to spend your time on earth investing in something. And my hope and my challenge for you and for myself is for us to spend that limited time we have helping to build the kingdom of God. One more picture I want to show you. This is a guy named Jim Kruger. He is a novelist, and for many years he was the creative director for Marvel Comics. So if you're into that world, that's kind of a big deal. He describes himself as a person who creates heroes for a living. Over the years, he's worked on the Avengers, X-Men, Star Wars, and Batman, and won all sorts of awards. I watched a recent interview with Mr. Kruger in which he was asked to describe this process of putting these stories together in a compelling way. And here's what he made a statement I thought was interesting. Here's what he said. He said, heroes never start out as heroes. Should you catch that? Heroes never start out as heroes. Because of the tyranny of the story, if a person is going to be a hero at the end, they can't start out as a hero. The hero's journey must begin oftentimes at a broken place, a kind of lost place. Some of you here this morning may find yourself in one of those broken places. You may look around at the circumstances of your life and it's not what you thought it would be. Nothing looks like you thought it was going to look. You haven't achieved what you thought you would achieve. Or it could be that what you're experiencing now is the sting of a little bit of regret, maybe a whole lot of regret. You look back over your life and you realize, man, this has been way more about me than it has been about other people, and I've kind of messed this thing up, and this is not at all where I wanted to be. I want you to know, if that's what you're feeling, that a hero never starts out as a hero. It all goes through some ups and downs, and sometimes the downs are really low before you get to experience any of the ups. And it could be that the next chapter of your life is much better than the previous chapters. But it won't happen because you're smart, because you have great willpower. It'll only happen because Jesus sheds his grace on you. So if you're here and you think, man, I really need a fresh start, I need the next chapter to be better. Maybe you feel like you need an Alfred, to help walk you through this. We got people that love to talk with you. We got people that love to help you, to pray with you. I'll be here. David will be here. Just come when we sing and hang out on these front rows, and we'll be glad to help you navigate that process. Others of you, though, and this may be the majority of you, kind of like I've been at different points in my life, you think, boy, I hope that our church is doing a good job of doing this. I hope that our church is doing a good job of making disciples. But here's the deal. The church is you. So if you're not doing a good job, then we're not doing a good job. So I want to challenge you. If you're here and for most of your life it's been about going to church, I want you to kind of strike that from your vocabulary and start thinking in terms of you actually being the church, you actually doing the things that Jesus told you to do. Maybe for you it looks like you just pull out a piece of paper and you make a list. You say, here's just 3 people that I'm going to intentionally connect with. Or maybe you make a list of people you're already connected with. You say, these are the people I'm going to make incremental movements. I'm going to help move them closer to Jesus. whatever it takes. I want you to stand, and we're going to have just a brief invitation. If you're here and you need to pray with somebody, you want to talk to somebody, you just come and hang out on this front row.